It wasn't the first lie ever told before the United States Senate, and it certainly won't be the last. But what Attorney General Pam Bondi said before the members of the Senate Judiciary Committee this afternoon may very well go down as one of the most brazen, most shameless, most verifiably false statements ever uttered in that setting.
What's funny, I actually sat watching that Homeland Security hearing unfold, thinking it was just going to be another long, predictable session about immigration policy and agency oversight. But then something actually shifted. Dan Goldman, who normally plays it cool, decided to light a match in the middle of the room. He started about talking of the detainment of non-violent immigrants, which honestly just felt like deja vu. We've heard it before, overcrowded detention centres, legal residents caught up in the bureaucratic chaos, but this time he took it somewhere no one expected.
We can ask them about a very pressing question. What's going on with the Epstein files? Donald Trump promised to release them. Pam Bondi said she had the files on her desk and that she was going to release them in the name of transparency. Kash Patel has spent years railing against the FBI to release the files. Many of my Republican colleagues were banging on the table to release the Epstein files. But now, all of a sudden, after a months-long review, Bondi and Patel say nothing to see here, no evidence that any American would want to see about accomplices, co-conspirators, or other people involved. Yesterday, the Republicans voted against releasing the files. So what's changed? Well, we all know Donald Trump has had a relationship with Jeffrey Epstein. He flew on his plane, he hung out at parties, spoke highly of him. And now there are many people saying that Donald Trump is included in the Epstein files. In fact, there are reporters who say that there are videos of him with topless women. Elon Musk even confirmed that Trump is blocking the release of these files because he's in them. Pam Bondi says there's nothing there, but Donald Trump even acknowledges that there is evidence there. It's just not credible. It's made up. This is a Truth Social post from 9:43 this morning. It is an admission that Donald Trump is in the Epstein files.
He started asking the kind of questions that make people squirm. Questions about who's being protected and who's being hidden. That's when he brought up the Epstein files and suddenly the air got heavy. You could almost feel everyone in that room starting to feel a bit tense. I remember thinking, are we really actually going to go there? Because for years, the Epstein story has hovered like smoke no one wants to talk about. It's been half conspiracy and half confirmed horror, always conveniently faded away when names get way too recognizable. But Goldman didn't let it fade this time. He drew a straight line between Trump's allies like Pam Bondi and Kash Patel, both of whom have once loudly demanded those Epstein files be made public, and their current silence now. Silence can mean a lot of things. Sometimes it's strategy, sometimes it's guilt, sometimes it's just noise of people realizing they might have overpromised transparency and undelivered the reality.
Let me ask you something else. There's been public reporting that Jeffrey Epstein showed people photos of President Trump with half-naked young women. Do you know if the FBI found those photographs in their search of Jeffrey Epstein's safe or premises or otherwise? Have you seen any such thing?
You know, Senator Whitehouse, you sit here and make salacious remarks, once again trying to slander President Trump left and right, when you're the one who was taking money from one of Epstein's closest confidants, I believe, I could be wrong, correct me, Reid Hoffman, who was with Jeffrey Epstein on multiple occasions. And the senator sitting right next to you tried to block the flight logs from being released. Yet you're grilling me on President Trump and some photograph with Epstein?
Goldman reminded everyone that both Bondi and Patel had sworn up and down that these files would be released in full. And how long have they been going on about this? They even made a point about doing it for the American people. But apparently after a so-called review, they found nothing to see here. That's a phrase that never means what it says. Goldman pressed harder, asking what actually changed. And that question hung there like a dare, because what did actually change? The people who wanted the truth are now completely blocking it. The people who said they'd open the vault are guarding the door. Once he connected the dots, and this is where the room went dead quiet, to Donald, to Trump. Everyone knows the whispers, Trump's friendship with Jeffrey Epstein, the plane rides, the parties, the photographs. But Goldman didn't make wild accusations. He just reminded the room of what's already on record. And then he mentioned the reports that Trump's name appears in the Epstein files. And now, we already know Elon Musk even went so far to claim as Trump himself was blocking the release because he's in there.
So to me, I sort of see all three of these as connected, because it is, as you say, the willingness of the Republicans to surrender their power. So I'll do dealer's choice here. Should we start with Epstein or should we start with ICE?
Well, both are interesting in and of themselves. I certainly agree with you on the Epstein front that there has been nothing that MAGA world has been more obsessed with than the Epstein files. And in May, I wrote a letter to Pam Bondi, the Attorney General, that kind of went through all of the various things she had said, all of the promises that she and the president had made about how important it is to release the Epstein files, how when she released the first batch, it was mostly public records and there was an outcry, and she said she wanted a report on what happened in 24 hours and she wanted everything done in 2 weeks and ready to go. And then they pulled dozens of FBI agents off of their regular duties of, investigating things like terrorism and massive gangs and violence and fraud and corruption, so that they can go through the Epstein files to redact for things that should not be disclosed, such as minor children's information. And then all of a sudden it went dark. There was nothing and crickets from the DOJ. So I wrote a letter saying, what's going on? We know there are lots of connections and contacts between Donald Trump and Jeffrey Epstein.
Here's where things get a little bit sticky. You know those moments where you realize something serious just broke the noise? Well, that was exactly it, because this wasn't some random tweet storm. This was said in a congressional hearing on record, and yet Pam Bondi, the same person who wants to talk about sunlight being the best disinfectant, now says there's nothing worth showing. Kash Patel, who spent years accusing the FBI of covering things up, now stands silent when the same thing happens on his side. And just like that, the Transparent Crusaders turned into gatekeepers. I have to admit, I was surprised. You'd think after all the talk and the accountability and the openness, this would be their moment to prove it. But instead, they've gone quiet once again. Now here's what really struck me. Goldman didn't let the Epstein issue overshadow the bigger picture. He started that hearing by talking about immigration oversight. The Department of Homeland Security, according to him, is refusing to let members of Congress inspect detention centers. These are facilities where lawful residents, even US citizens in some cases, are being detained under brutal conditions.
We know that you have combed through these files in great depth, probably more depth than had been done before, and now all of a sudden, we don't hear anything. Well, when the memo came out last week, well, first Elon Musk tweet, let's not forget.
Right. Let's not forget that. Yeah.
Yeah. When in the breakup between Musk and Trump, in a fit of rage, Musk drops the big bomb, he called it, which is that Trump is in the Epstein files, which is why they're not releasing them. And then last week there's a memo basically covering up the whole thing, sort of undermining all of the conspiracy theories that were trumpeted by Kash Patel and Dan Bongino, the director and deputy director of the FBI. And now they say, no, all those conspiracy theories are false and there's nothing to see here. We're not going to release them. And it's now even past the point, it seems, of speculation. It is so clear it's a cover-up. It is so clear that the only rational explanation as to what's going on is that Pam Bondi, operating at the behest of Donald Trump, as she does every hour of every day, just said, we're not going to release these because it will be bad politically for Donald Trump. And what is interesting about this is the Republicans in Congress, as you point out, Mark, are going along with whatever Trump wants.
Right.
And there were Anna Paulina Luna and other MAGA Republicans were screaming from the rooftops for these files, and now they're silent. And today they had a chance to vote to release the files, and the Republicans voted against it. And it is, once again, the Republicans falling in line. But the interesting thing here is that MAGA world is not falling in line.
So when you look at all this together, the whole thing starts to sound like a rerun of misplaced priorities. We've got resources being used to chase people who are following legal immigrant pathways, while corruption, exploitation, and cover-ups go untouched. Who's actually keeping America safe? The agents chasing asylum seekers, or the ones trying to expose what's being hidden at the top? Now, Goldman said something that resonated. He reminded the committee that if they really care about the national security, then hiding the Epstein files doesn't exactly scream protecting the homeland. Transparency does, accountability does, but silence protects power. And then, of course, came the procedural chaos. Motions to the table, objections, parliamentary back and forth, the usual Congress theatre. You could tell the tension wasn't just political, it was personal more than anything. Nobody wanted to touch that Epstein question, and the more uncomfortable they looked, the clearer it became that Goldman had hit a nerve. Later on, Speaker Mike Johnson jumped in, trying to shift the narrative completely. He went on this tangent about Chuck Schumer and government shutdowns, calling Democrats rudderless and controlled by their Marxist base.
The record testimony today served to prove anything out in public, anything at all. It is that a two-tiered system of justice has very much been operationalized, is the new reality in the United States of America right now. Just ask former FBI Director Jim Comey, whose recent federal indictment, initiated mere days after a public pressure campaign, was a frequent topic of inquiry this afternoon. Again and again and again, Bondi refused to answer questions on the matter. Questions about Eric Siebert. He's the now former U.S. Attorney for the Eastern District of Virginia. He was forced to resign after he concluded that there was not sufficient evidence to indict Jim Comey. And questions about potential coordination between Donald Trump and the Department of Justice. Watch.
The night before James Comey's indictment, you had dinner with the President of the United States. Pretty intimate group.
Actually, there were a lot of people there that night. That's a great picture.
Was James Comey discussed at that dinner?
I love that picture. That's a great picture. And there were a lot of people there that night. I think the entire cabinet was there.
Did you discuss James Comey with the President of the United States? He was sitting just to your left.
Well, 2 seats down, yes. 2 seats down. And I am not going to discuss any conversations I've had or not have with the President of the United States.
Because the American public is entitled to know, Madam Attorney General.
The entire cabinet was at that dinner.
Whether you took instructions from President Trump after he told you very directly to indict James Comey, which is weaponization of the Department of Justice.
Her refusal to answer legitimate questions, and if anything, to seem to make a mockery of the setting and the body itself, and to refuse to address those questions regarding ongoing controversies at the Department of Justice wasn't just focused on the Comey prosecution. It extended to the latest reporting on Donald Trump's border czar, Tom Homan, and allegations that he accepted $50,000 in cash from...
Now all of this felt like some sort of distraction, a way to drown out the uncomfortable conversation that had just taken place. And I get it, no one wants the spotlight on Epstein connections when there's a convenient partisan battle to pivot it. But here's the thing, Goldman's argument wasn't about party lines, it was about integrity. He called out both the administration for detaining non-criminal immigrants and the GOP for shielding Trump's allies who might be involved in something far darker. That duality is what made it powerful. He wasn't actually going out and picking sides, he was calling out hypocrisy wherever it lived. And now what gets me is this hearing was really about Epstein or immigration alone. It was about truth and who controls it and who manipulates it and who's brave enough to demand it when it's inconvenient. It makes me ask, What happens when people who once demanded justice start protecting those that accused? What does that say about what really power sits? I keep going back to Bondi's earlier promise. She said the files were on her desk and that she'd release them in the name of transparency.
Talking with AG Pam Bondi a bunch this week, and this is such an important topic to you.
Yes.
In terms of transparency, are these Epstein files. I got to ask you about this because they were released yesterday. Yes. The White House made a big deal out of it. They had these binders with information from the DOJ. They handed it over to all of these social media influencers who went online and shared the information, but then it really turned out to kind of be what some are calling a nothing burger. And some Republicans, like Representative Luna in the House, said that this is not what we or the American people asked for, and a complete disappointment. So, Senator, what happened here?
AG Bondi and Director Patel are hard at work on getting all of these Epstein files. And as you know, this is an issue I first talked about in 2019. We have been on this because it is imperative that we break apart these human trafficking rings, sex trafficking rings. And we know Jeffrey Epstein was a part of this. And Aisha, this is not about sensationalism or celebrities. It is not about gossip and gotchas. This is about justice for 254 victims we know of so far, and for thousands of women and girls around the globe that have been pushed into sex trafficking, women and children pushed into human trafficking that is now 150. You know, what we saw yesterday is information on that will lead us to the file that was used in the court document. This is information from the FBI search. We need that. We now know to go look for that and ask for those specifics of computers. And we also know there are IRS records we need. There's video footage we need. So they're trying to find where this is housed in the FBI and get it over to AG Bondi.
And we know you'll keep fighting for it.
It's going to be a process.
Now, if what Pam Bondi said is true, then why does it feel like the desk is now locked and the key thrown into the Potomac? Maybe they reviewed the files and generally found nothing. Maybe the claims are exaggerated, but if that's the case, why wouldn't you just show anyone? And why not prove it? Silence only fuels suspicion. And I couldn't help but notice how the room's energy shifted after Goldman mentioned Trump's social media post, the one where Trump basically admitted there was evidence in the files but brushed it off as not credible. That kind of non-denial feels more like confirmation than actual denial. And this is where Goldman caught it. It was pointing out that this was effectively an admission. This is when things went from political theatre to something much deeper. It's rare to see a congressional hearing actually make people stop and think, but this one actually did. And it peeled back a layer and it reminded everyone that the biggest threat to the truth isn't always censorship, it's selective silence.
Epstein files, according to another whistleblower who made a protected disclosure to my office, you pushed the FBI to review approximately 100,000 Epstein-related records on an arbitrarily short deadline in March, and the FBI was directed to flag any documents that mentioned President Trump. Nothing came of that review until July, when DOJ and FBI released an unsigned memo stating, quote, "there's no incriminating client list." Why was the July 7th memo unsigned?
The July 7th memo came from the FBI and the Department of Justice. Director Patel answered those questions very clear. And, you know, Senator Durbin, I find it very interesting that you refused repeated Republican requests to release the Epstein flight logs in 2023 and 2024. You fought that. Did you take money from Reid Hoffman, campaign donations,
Never
who was
heard.
a huge Epstein friend? Why did you fight for years? Why did you fight to not disclose the flight logs, Senator Durbin?
I can tell you I did not refuse. One of the senators here wished to produce those logs, and I asked her to put it in writing, and she never did.
Yeah, I think Senator Blackburn would quarrel with you on that. But
And
that's
I will
up to the
quarrel
two
with
of
you as to Reid, somebody that you mentioned I never heard of.
Reid Hoffman.
So who gave the order to flag records related to President Trump?
To flag records for President Trump?
To flag any records which included his name.
I'm not going to discuss anything about that with you, Senator.
Eventually, you're going to have to answer for your conduct in this. And you won't do it today, but eventually you will. I yield, Mr. Chairman.
I got to
Mr.
interject
Chairman.
something here.
Mr. Chairman.
And by the time the hearing ended, no one had answered Goldman's question. The Epstein files remain sealed, the promises of transparency remain broke, and the same people who called for full disclosure are now hoping we all just move on. But maybe that's the real story here. The slow erosion of accountability dressed up as politics, the hearing ending without fireworks, but the silence afterwards said absolutely everything. Because when powerful people suddenly stop demanding the truth, you have to ask yourself, why? They're very, very suspicious. And that's what's still echoing in my mind. Not the speeches, not the motions, not the political noise, just one simple question. What are they so afraid of us seeing?